The halfway stage of the UEFA Champions League group stage meanwhile, and the goals and talking points are coming thick and fast. Here are just a few of tonight's topics. Boy, Spurs needed that. Kane and co seeing off poor opposition for a much needed win, which was something Zinedine Zidane also needed in Turkey, and Toni Kroos duly delivered. Meanwhile, expect fireworks at the San Siro tonight as Inter boss Conte vows to attack dangerous Dortmund. All that, plus I'll even break the habit of a lifetime and talk about the Ballon d'Or. So yes, fanboys and fangirls, something for you tonight as well. Speaking of which, Andy Brassel's here, our European football expert, joins me from the UK. Good to see you, Andy. It was a fantastic night of Champions League action in the UEFA context, I must say. Can you tell me what you think was the single most important result and why?
John, I think it has to be Spurs beating Crvena Zvezda, because I saw Spurs at the weekend. They were pretty flat, pretty terrible. They needed a boost. But just in terms of the Champions League itself, I think Crvena Zvezda arrived in London thinking if they could get some points on the road, they'd be in business in terms of qualification. So for Tottenham to take control of their Champions League destiny again was very important.
Yeah, absolutely. Really good point. We'll talk about that very shortly. Let's just have a quick look at last night's results. And it really split into two camps. There were those who looked as if they may struggle and needed a result. And into that category, of course, Spurs go. But you might also look at Real Madrid, who needed a result. It was a struggle for a different reason for Juventus. Then you look at those who are flying. And thanks to hat-tricks, we had Kylian Mbappe coming off the bench for PSG and scoring a second-half hat-trick. We had 1 in 11 minutes from Raheem Sterling for Manchester City. Those two clubs all but qualified, absolutely flying. Bayern Munich as well, perfect record with 3 out of 3 wins. But let's turn to that Spurs story just now, because remember what happened against Bayern Munich last time out. 5-0 this time, however, against Red Star. And it must be said, even though they were, frankly, a disappointing team, it was good to see those England players in particular stepping up. And by that, if we look at the headlines, you'll see what I mean, because it wasn't just one-for-one club. It was both. It was Harry Kane and Raheem Sterling, strike partners for England just a week ago, and of course scoring for their clubs in a prolific sense and creating, well, in Kane's sense. Kane and Son doing the job. Yeah, they really did. 5 goals going in here. And Andy, let's pick up on the point you made earlier on. What was impressive about this, and I must keep saying, I don't think the opposition was very good. I felt that they were losing the ball in dangerous positions way too much, but Spurs had to still nick it, didn't they? And they showed the appetite going forward that they needed.
Yeah, they did. And I think we can talk about Harry Kane, and quite rightly so. He's the talisman for Tottenham. But I thought Eric Lamela made a massive difference. He made a difference when he came on against Watford at the weekend. And even when he missed chance after chance after chance in that second half, by which point Tottenham were pretty much home and hosed, he kept going. Of course, he created the opening 2 goals. And the fact that even when it's not really happening, he snaps into tackles and covers a lot of ground, that's exactly what Tottenham needed.
And when they needed it as well, they've got some good news defensively, because that has been an area in which they have been struggling. Of course, we know that they and Liverpool did it the hard way last time around, so you can't write them off, can you, Andy, really, at this stage? And in fact, in the context of that group, you'd say they're probably going to be okay, aren't they?
Yeah, they are. I think to evacuate the Bayern result is the most important thing. I think it was a freak result, but a potentially very damaging one. And, they're in a much better position than they were at this stage in the Champions League last year, when they only had 1 point.
Yeah, well, obviously they are going to have to take on mighty Bayern again later on, December time. But before that, you'll feel they'll be fine. Now, let's have a look at Lewandowski and what he achieved for Bayern Munich, because he destroyed Olympiacos, Piraeus as they're known there, obviously. He did so with a couple of goals to add to a prolific tally so far this season. 18 goals for him. Remarkable. 5 and 3 in the Champions League, 12 and 8 in Bundesliga football. And last night, he edged 2 clear of Ruud van Nistelrooy and into sole occupancy of 5th spot in the all-time Champions League top scorers chart. And Andy, that tells you something about this guy. He just goes from strength to strength. His appetite for goals is stunning, isn't it?
It really is, John. And I think if you look at the very top of that list and you look at Cristiano Ronaldo, you wonder if Lewandowski's taking a bit of advice from him, really. There is the growing feeling, I think, especially in Germany, that Lewandowski
put them into the very top context in terms of can they win the Champions League, and you don't want to be defending like this, do you?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And you talked about the Zula injury at the weekend. They had another bit of bad news in Piraeus because, of course, Lucas Hernandez went down with an ankle injury, which is likely to keep him out for at least a couple of months. And Bayern are really annoyed with the French Football Federation. They said their doctor, Hans Müller-Wölfert, gave them fair warning that he wasn't ready to play on international duty, and they feel that it aggravated and weakened Hernandez's condition. And, of course, he's their club record signing. So the likes of Benjamin Pavard and even someone who's been marginalised like Jerome Boateng are going to have to step up.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got some feedback in from Imran. This one here talking about Harry Kane here, how creative Harry Kane has become of late for Spurs and England, playing a different role compared to previous seasons for both club and country. Bergkamp-esque. Okay, yeah. Well, that's probably true, actually, the way he's playing these days. Just coming back to you on that, we do like what Harry Kane is doing. He's a 9.5, isn't he? I know we hear it said, but I can't think of any way of describing him.
And you know what, John? It's simultaneously exciting and confusing, because I think if you speak to lots of people here in England, it's not just pride at how much Harry Kane has grown, but a bit of worry in a sense, because when he's dropping deep and linking play, does that show Spurs are missing something? And shouldn't he be in the penalty box like Lewandowski, trying to finish all those chances off?
Well, that's just it, isn't it? Whatever works for the team, ultimately, that's what it's about. Let's have a quick look at the Group C standings right now. And Manchester City, absolutely flying. Pep Guardiola did say at the weekend that he felt his team wasn't defending well enough to be able to win the Champions League this year. There goes that comment about Bayern Munich once again. But as it was, 5 more goals scored. Raheem Sterling, the star of the show, involved in so much, involved in absolutely everything. Raheem is perfect. He's beginning to look perfect. Pep Guardiola said that, and he was just there when they needed him to. 11 minutes separating those 3 strikes. Let's have a quick look at where he is now. At the age of just 24, he is now England's 5th highest Champions League scorer, just behind Steven Gerrard, Lampard, Scholes, Rooney, and he will beat all of them, one would imagine, if he keeps going. Absolutely no doubt. Let's have a look at a couple more headlines, Andy, before you talk about Raheem Sterling for me. Pep Guardiola, funnily enough, made the headlines for coming out and moaning about the amount of football that his team had to play. I think it was a reaction to the Rodri injury. He doesn't want injuries. He doesn't want anyone at the back especially getting injured. But quite frankly, Pep, to have a go at UEFA and FIFA, everyone's been playing international games. Everyone's playing in these tournaments. Everyone has to play, according to the Premier League, at Christmas time and even have a bit of a winter break. So that's what he was moaning about. Andy, I'll come back to you. 2 things. Let's start with Raheem Sterling. Then I want to talk to you about Phil Foden in just a moment. Sterling does look at the moment as if he's right up there with the best anywhere, right? Agree?
Yeah, there's absolutely no question about that. And I think it's not just the goals, it's the creativity. You look at the goals and they almost seem a byproduct of his general brilliance. And how many players can we really say that about? I suppose we've got to start with Leo Messi. We don't want to put him quite in that bracket yet, but he's someone who looks as if he can do everything for Manchester City and England, and he is doing that.
Let's talk about Phil Foden. You will have seen, obviously, that he got a red card. It was a silly little pullback on the yellow, and Pep Guardiola said he's going to learn. Pep also said, I'm not going to fine him, because anyone who watched Foden's performance realised why Pep has been hanging on to this player, and realised why, if Foden has any sense, Andy, he will just bide his time, because he's the next David Silva, isn't he? He's just going to stroll into that role, I'm sure.
And if anything, John, it's just the red card is just a mark of his desire about how badly he wants to be part of everything for Manchester City. It is a little bit of over-eagerness. And as you say, with David Silva set to pack it in at the end of the season at Manchester City, that does mean that there is a gap opening up, and he's putting himself front and centre, especially when you look at where else Manchester City could reinforce. They definitely need to do something in defence, so perhaps that will be the focus of their spending, rather than looking for a David Silva replacement next summer.
Funny, the parallel with Bayern Munich continues to an extent here. Victor's written in saying defensive issues may hinder City's chances in the Champions League. They'll be hoping that Laporte makes his return in the new year. Suddenly the players are getting injured here and there. Not something Pep wants, no matter how deep the squad. Yeah, of course we saw Pep throwing the 2 midfielders into his back 4 at the weekend, Andy, didn't we? And yeah, Laporte, who has been stunning before his injury, is somebody that you would want back pronto. Can you see this being a problem that could derail City's ultimate ambition, which is to win this competition?
Well, it's not ideal, John, that's for sure. But if there's going to be a time that it's going to happen, you want it to be now. You don't want it to be in the back end of the Champions League. And what Victor was saying about Laporte coming back in the new year, they'll hope the same for John Stones as well. They'll hope that Rodri's clear of whatever muscle injury he's got. That shouldn't be an issue long term. So really, that's the most important thing to them, because not only is Rodri and Fernandinho in defence a little bit of DIY, it's the fact that they'll be missed in the centre of the park. So that's what they want covered.
Yeah, very good point. OK, fine. So far, so good. Things get a bit tighter after the break. We'll be talking about Zinedine Zidane, who travelled to Turkey needing a result. And thanks to Tony Kroos, he got it in a game packed with drama. You're on and you're enjoying this show here. Get your comments in. We're going to talk about Real Madrid, Zinedine Zidane, who remarkably travelled to Turkey with his job reportedly under threat. We'll get Andy Brassell's take on that in just a moment. And then, of course, we'll develop more when it comes to looking ahead to Champions League matches as we build through the rest of the show. Keep those comments coming in. Welcome back. As I stand here, you know, another night of Champions League action in Europe is just a few hours away, but we're going to get to that in a short while. We're going to pick our way through the other major talking point from last night right now, and that concerns the Group A, where we find Real Madrid, who got themselves into a bit of a mess and who may just be extricating themselves in the first of their two back-to-back matches against Galatasaray, going to Istanbul and winning by 1-0 thanks to Tony Kroos and an Hazard with an assist, but also hitting the crossbar when it looked easier for him to score. But they got a result in the end, and a hugely significant one, because given what happened to them at the weekend against Mallorca, the knives are out for Zinedine Zidane. And this headline here from AS basically says Zidane saved a match point. It's almost as if, had that gone wrong for them in Turkey, it was a match point against him, and he may well have found himself out of a job. That's what they're saying. What's interesting here is this double take here, in which they went inside the paper here, talking about the fact that Courtois and Madrid simultaneously revived themselves, because Courtois has come in for an awful lot of criticism. He'd conceded goals from 12, I think, of the 24 shots he faced this season. Now, Andy Brassell, European expert, is with me. And Andy, it's been one of the fascinating sagas this season that Zidane is under so much threat. Whilst you're talking, we're going to pop up some win percentages that show that he's way, way down in this second stint in terms of La Liga form, in terms of what they expect at that club.
Yeah, absolutely. And they've got away with it a little bit this season because other teams have had their problems at the start of the season, in La Liga at least. So you look at Barcelona struggling to win away from home in the first month or two of the season. Then you look at Atletico Madrid trying to bid in so many new players. And that's let them get away with it. I think you could argue in any normal season with Barcelona and Atletico at normal pace, then Real Madrid would probably be in fifth or sixth place at the moment. But Zidane has got a second life. And of course, as you say, this win at Galatasaray gives him a little bit more breathing space, because 1 point after 2 Champions League games was nowhere near acceptable.
And that's why he was talking about the players playing for him and talking about how much he needed that one. Right, on we go then. We're going to turn our attention to the rest of the action to come. These are the fixtures coming along later on tonight. And our particular focus a little bit later on in the show will be on Liverpool on their trip to take on Genk. Inter Dortmund leaps out at you, and we'll talk about that one in just a moment. And Ajax Chelsea's got a nice little ring about it as well. But off we go to the San Siro and Group F, which is where we find Inter struggling, languishing, as Andy was saying, 1 point from 2. Not really what you want, even though they are in the proverbial group of death. And as it is, Slavia Prague, no, they're up against it. But can Inter get something against Dortmund, who will travel there and play the same way that they know how to play, because there's only one way? This is Antonio Conte. Now, as far as I can make out from this one, he's basically saying we give ourselves the first slap. What he was talking about here is he said we're going to attack. You know, we're going for this one. There's going to be no fear. We've got to get after Dortmund. And Andy, this is fascinating because, you know, obviously the massive game in Spain, it was a game of fine margins, didn't go their way. Subsequently, they played Juventus again, you know, a tight one, didn't go quite their way. But he's backing himself against the Dortmund side that we know you can get at, right?
Well, it's big talk, John, but you just wonder how useful it is practically, because of course a Lucien Favre side is fantastic on the counter-attack. And you look at the players, they're a bit wobbly at the weekend. As Julian Brandt said after they beat Gladbach, we have to thank both our goalkeepers for playing well for us, because Roman Burki made some good saves, and then when he went off, Marvin Hitz did exactly the same thing. So a lot, I think, rests on Mats Hummels and how he can really lead this group, and they need to sort out what they're doing at fullback as well.
Let's take a little look at one that really appeals to us here, and this is this group in match day 3. It's Ajax against Chelsea in Group H here. Chelsea, okay, a setback first start, but up and running now with the kids being all right and all that, and it's 3 points from 2 for them. Ajax, meanwhile, are showing the form of last season despite those high-profile departures. And I think one of the fascinating things about this, of course, is that Frank Lampard, who's been heralded for his use of the young players, and Hudson-Odoi at the weekend was brilliant, to go with Mount, to go with Abraham, to go with Tomori. There's so much there that the talk was all about development. And he said, hang on, you can't compare us with Ajax, who have been doing this for so long. But it's very nice, Andy, that this kind of a conversation comes along. And I, for one, I'm looking at the, Mason Mount up against Donny. That is a lovely little duel for me. I'm looking to see how these kids go. It's a nice game, this, isn't it, from a neutral perspective?
Yeah, it is, but I do feel it could be a steep learning curve for Chelsea. As Lampard says, I don't think you can really make the comparison between the two, because it's a necessity for Chelsea this year to use these sort of players, whereas for Ajax it's a necessity every year.
Yeah.
What the sales of De Ligt and De Jong have given them, as well as the Champions League money, is an absolutely unprecedented reign to carry on the way they're going, build on that fantastic season, keep a lot of players, give extended contracts to the likes of Ziyech, Dusan Tadic, experienced players like Daley Blind, who can really help those younger players like Serginho Dest to develop, and they have looked irresistible in the Champions League so far this season.
They absolutely have, and Chelsea's form lately means that is a game you want to be watching here. Wesley, thanks for writing in. Really looking forward to Ajax versus Chelsea later, with both teams full of promising youngsters, which usually means open, attacking and end-to-end football. I don't know about Ajax, but every time I've seen Chelsea this year, that is all you are going to get from this Frank Lampard team. Right, looking forward to that. We're going to come back and talk about this huge list of names, because we are actually going to talk about the Ballon d'Or, but we're going to do so initially, at least, in a Liverpool competition. They find themselves travelling to take on Genk tonight, and they do so, remember, having been beaten by Napoli first up, then had that humdinger against Salzburg after that. So a lot of fun, it must be said. Let's have a quick look at the group table that they find themselves in Group E. There they are. Napoli top, of course, with 4 points. Liverpool and Salzburg on 3. Genk, who host them tonight, on 1. Now, Jurgen Klopp still seething and probably still chasing down John Moss, the 4th official from the weekend at Old Trafford, has had this to say about what they need to get right, and that is they must win on the road or face knockout. You can't do what they did last year. You can't lose your 3 away games and hope to go through again. Andy Brassell's with me. I mean, I'm putting words in your mouth here, but no, Liverpool can't be doing that again, can they? They need to move forward in that sense, right?
Yeah, they really do, and it's something that they dealt with in the knockout stages of the Champions League last year quite brilliantly. The winner, the Allianz Arena against Bayern, really fired their whole campaign. I'd feel pretty confident for them going to Genk. Of course, Genk lost their coach, Philippe Clement, to Club Brugge. He's done an absolutely terrific job there, despite that loss to Paris Saint-Germain last night, and it's just not been the same against Felice Matsu. They've lost a couple of key players as well.
Yeah, okay, fine. The other thing that really piqued my interest from Jurgen Klopp was this magnificent 7-point away for Klopp. He actually spoke about the fact that they had 7 players nominated in that 30-man shortlist for the Ballon d'Or, and saying that shows that the club is developing. So let's take a little look at the names, shall we? And of course, we've thrown all of them onto one graphic, and there they all are. The thing about this one is I don't really, Andy, want to get into a massive sort of, fanboy, goat kind of debate here, because I'm always a bit sceptical about Ballon d'Or. I quite like Golden Shoe, because that quantifiably pits striker against striker who scores the most. But what I'd like to point out is that 15 of these come from Premier League clubs. So I guess that's representative of the English club's form of last season, particularly in the Champions League. Otherwise, you can always pick noteworthy omissions, and you can always look at, those who perhaps should have been there, weren't there. But who would you say, away from, the Ronaldo-Messi argument, is the one that you go, that's a worthwhile, worthy reward for fantastic form over the last year? They've got a chance.
I suppose Van Dijk is the most obvious one. I would have to say that. It would be nice to see it move away from just attacking players. I mean, you talked about quantifiable terms of what makes a great footballer a great footballer. But I think in the case of Van Dijk, he's someone who has changed Liverpool. He's absolutely changed Liverpool since he's arrived there. I think Alisson is in the same bracket. I still don't understand how he's the one of the 30 that's a goalkeeper, and yet Oblak and Ter Stegen are battling it out for the Yashin Trophy, yet neither of them are in it.
No, I don't get it at all. I mean, to be honest with you, I like the individual categories, i.e. goalkeeper, striker, whatever it may be. It's very difficult to put a striker against the defender. Jerome, out of all the Liverpool nominations in the Ballon d'Or, Virgil van Dijk has the best chance of winning the trophy. You say he should have won the best award as well after his contributions for club and country in 2019. But I hope Ballon d'Or will be his to own. That's the other thing as well, isn't it, Andy? When it comes to this one, you sort of factor in club form as a whole, and sometimes players get dragged along. I've seen that happen to Franck Ribéry, for example, in the past, you know, dragged along, even if he hasn't had a great season by Bayern's success. And you get that with countries. I mean, I saw Hugo Lloris, for instance, on this list here, and I was a little bit surprised at that. Couldn't quite fathom that one. But, okay, let's see who's going to win it. What would you say? You've gone down the Van Dijk route right now. All the Messi fans jump up and down and say, hang on a minute, the numbers cannot be argued with.
Yeah, but for me, I guess like you, collective trophies count more than anything. And if you've made the major contribution to that, I think fair enough. Going back to the Ribéry point, I think it's an interesting one because in the year that he could have won it, 2013, of course, he was overtaken by that fantastic Cristiano Ronaldo performance in the World Cup qualifying playoff against Sweden, which really brought it back to what it always has been about just goals and an individual face-off between Messi and Ronaldo. But the problem with Ribéry, like I guess the problem with a couple of the Ajax players, is just that when it's such a great collective effort, it does split the votes.
All right, well, there we are then. And a bit like the Oscars, it's about lobbying as much as it might be about whether or not you've made a better movie. It's as simple as that. It comes down to things like that. And just quickly, I know this is something that we weren't prepping for today, but we're going to talk about this on Friday. Mesut Ozil and Arsenal, something we're going to talk about on Friday's show. I want your take on this one. Does anyone take this guy right now? Does he play football anywhere anytime soon?
I think it's a huge problem for Emery because it's the shadow that's hanging over him. And with Arsenal struggling so much at the moment, I think Mesut Ozil is more physically powerful than people give him credit for. The best thing they can do is put him in the shop window by playing him.
Andy, thank you very much. You know, we're going to have Jens Lehmann, the former Invincible, coming on the show on Friday, and he will give us his take on Mesut Ozil, on Arsenal, on where they're going, and much, much more. But for the time being, I'm indebted, as ever, to Andy Brassel for his comments. Always wonderful chatting European football with you. Enjoy the action tonight, Andy. Thank you very much. And the same goes for all of you.